Welcome to The Explainer. You know, we all look at world maps, but have you ever really stopped to think about how we got all those lines and borders? Well, today we're going to decode the secret language of that map. We're going to figure out how our political world is drawn up, how it's divided, and how it's defined. It is a fantastic question, right? And the answer is, well, it's way more interesting than you'd think. The map we all take for granted, with its nearly 200 countries, that's a pretty recent invention. And understanding how it was made isn't just some boring history lesson. It is the absolute key to unlocking everything from huge international conflicts to your own sense of who you are. And look, to solve this giant global puzzle, we really only need two key pieces: the state and the nation. Now, they might sound kind of similar, but trust me, they are fundamentally different. If you can get this one distinction right, the entire world map is just going to snap into focus. All right, so let's start with the first piece of our puzzle, the state. The easiest way to think about it is as a political container. This is all about the hard lines on the map. We're talking borders, governments, and just raw power. The key idea here, the absolute most important word, is sovereignty. Sovereignty just means that a state has the final, ultimate say over what happens inside its own borders. No other country, no outside power gets to interfere. This single idea is really the bedrock of our entire international system. So, to be a true state on the world stage, you've got to have all three of these things. That's exactly why Ohio, even though we call it a state, isn't a sovereign state like, say, France is. Ohio is part of a bigger federal government, right? It answers to Washington, D.C. France, on the other hand, answers to no one. That is sovereignty in action. Okay, on to our second puzzle piece, the nation. Now, if the state is the political container, the nation is the cultural stuff that's inside it. This has nothing to do with borders or laws. It's all about people, identity, and a shared story.
So a nation is a cultural unit. It's defined by a shared sense of us. It's a feeling, a common background, not a line on a map. And getting this distinction right, the political state versus the cultural nation, that is the most important takeaway so far. It is the key to everything else we're about to talk about. For instance, think about the Flemish-speaking people in Belgium or the Basque people, whose culture stretches across parts of both Spain and France. These are distinct nations. And the critical point is that their shared identity exists completely separate from any political borders. They are a people, even if they don't have their own country. So let's just quickly recap this. The state is the political box, the government, the territory, the borders. The nation is the cultural community inside, the people and their shared identity. They're two totally separate things. But what happens when we start putting them together? Well, that's where world history gets really interesting. All right, now for the really fun part, we get to see what happens when we start mashing these two building blocks, states and nations, together in all the different ways they show up on the world map. Now, in a perfect world, at least for some people, the political borders of a state and the cultural boundaries of a nation would line up perfectly. One people, one country. Super clean, super simple. And this arrangement has a name. It's called a nation-state. But here's what's so fascinating. A true, pure nation-state is incredibly rare in the world today. Japan and Iceland are the classic examples you always hear about, and that's largely because of things like geographic isolation, or in Japan's case, historically very restrictive immigration policies that led to a population that's very, very similar culturally. For most of the world, this is the exception, not the rule. What's much, much more common is a state that has many different cultural groups, many different nations, all living inside the same set of political borders. This is the reality for almost every single country on the planet, including places like the United States and Russia. Canada is just a perfect example of this. You've got distinct English-speaking and French-speaking nations, plus numerous indigenous nations, all coexisting within one single political state. This right here is the global norm. Okay, now we get to a situation that is, frankly, often a source of major global conflict. This is what happens when a nation, a distinct cultural group with a shared identity, doesn't have its own sovereign state anywhere in the world. The Kurds are just a powerful and often tragic example. They are a distinct nation of over 30 million people, with their own language, their own culture, but their traditional homeland is split up among 4 different states: Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria. They are, quite literally, a nation without a state.
And that brings us to our final main category. This one describes a situation where a single nation is so large or widespread that its people are actually spread out across the borders of several different separate states. The Korean people are such a powerful modern example of this. They are absolutely one nation with a shared language and heritage, but they're divided into two totally separate sovereign states, North and South Korea. The Yoruba people are another great example, with their nations spanning across Nigeria, Benin, and Togo.
So let's just put it all together on one screen. You can see right here the four main ways that states and nations combine and overlap. From that neat and tidy nation-state all the way to the complex and often painful reality of stateless nations. This simple framework gives us a really powerful lens to see how our world is actually organized.
So, you might be thinking, okay, cool, these are some interesting definitions, but why should I really care about the difference between a multinational state and a multi-state nation? Well, it turns out these labels matter a lot. This isn't just some academic jargon we're talking about. This vocabulary is the key that unlocks the global headlines you see every single day. The next time you read a story about an independence movement, or a border dispute, or a big debate over national identity, you'll be able to see what's really going on. It's almost always about that fundamental and often tense relationship between a nation and a state. You see, the lines on our maps have never been permanent. They are constantly shifting, constantly being drawn and redrawn by this push and pull between nations and states. And that leaves us with a final, pretty big question. In an age of globalization, with people and cultures moving and mixing more than ever before, are the borders we know today really built to last?